Good afternoon. Thank you for coming today. I also brought my Chief Operating Officer, Kirsten Recknagel, with me to talk a little bit about some of the frameworks and examples that we have to share with you. So over the next 15 minutes, we're going to talk about how it's not about the size of your data, but how smart it is, and how smart data can actually lead to better quality outputs. So at MotiveQuest, we've been playing in social big data for about 10 years. And it's been really interesting to watch the rise of big data over the last several years. And we've realized that social data can lead to a lot of quality insights, but it really needs to be organized and analyzed in a certain way. So that's what we're going to talk a little bit about today. So let's put some context around how big social data is. And I just stopped the presentation. There we go. So let's add a little context here. So between the birth of the world and 2003, there were 5 exabytes of information created. Now, to add some context how big social data has gotten, we now create 5 exabytes every 2 days. So big data is actually pretty big. Big data follows us no matter where we go. It's at this conference. I think almost every presentation you're going to hear the word big data. It's in the publications that we love to read and refer to. The Harvard Business Review wrote a great article about big data, and The Economist did as well, but it's everywhere. It's also following us around at work. You know, we're seeing that more and more companies are creating big data teams, unstructured data teams, and they're really trying to wrap their heads around this, and it's not easy. And they're trying to leverage the data they already have because they feel that they've got too much data, but they're also trying to get data from other sources and really put the two together and understand it, leverage different vendors, new methodologies, but really it's still in a state of flux, and no one knows what to do with big data, how it can go together. And right now it seems like more and more it's working in isolation of one another versus actually working together. So today we're going to share one idea, 2 examples, and 4 secrets, and in hopes that you'll be able to take our learnings over the last 10 years in leveraging social big data and apply them to some of your other big data needs. So let's start with the one idea. So big data to us is kind of like this big dog. It's kind of dopey and you don't really know what to do with it. How can you start to better understand this big data? And it seems that everyone thinks big data has to be big, because big data means more insights, better metrics, better opportunity. But that's not exactly true. Big data doesn't have to be big. Big data can start big, but big data really needs to be boiled down to smart data. So at MotiveQuest, what we do is we go out and harvest, for one project, 40 million conversations. And our data scientists actually boil that down to the smart data that matters that our strategists can go analyze. And that data could go from 40 million to 40,000 very quickly to the data set you really need to work with. So how do you get to smart data? Well, we have 5 traits of smart data. And this can be applied to other data sources as well. It doesn't have to just be social. The first trait is that it's custom data. So it's custom harvested, it's custom curated, but there has to be some sort of custom element to it that has to do with your business challenge and the opportunity that you're trying to get to. It has to be organized. We find so many times, whether it's social data with dashboards or it's email data or other text data that's being analyzed, is it's never really organized. It's put into one giant data set and then it's left to whoever is going to analyze it. And I mean, it's like taking panel data, focus group data, and survey data and putting it in a blender and mixing it together and saying, make sense of this. And we find that that doesn't work. You really need to organize your data. And I'll talk a little bit in a second about how we organize social data at MotiveQuest. You also have to have a system in place to check for accuracy. We're finding that in the social big data space, it's like the wild, wild west. There's really no quality data checks out there. There's no norms, there's no standards, no one's really checking on how everyone's getting the data. And a lot of people are buying third-party data And when they buy that, they're taking on that responsibility to provide their clients with accurate data, but they really don't have the systems in place to check to make sure that it's accurate. The other thing is methodology. One thing at MotiveQuest that we do is we really split our data scientists who harvest the data and organize it apart from our strategists and our researchers who actually work on analyzing the data. And when you do that, you have to have a unique methodology to understand certain pieces of data. So we have different frameworks, and we'll share a few of those frameworks with you as well. And then the last thing is breadth. You really have to have the breadth of data. So much research today is done on the what, and it's done on your brand versus your competitor brand. And we always ask our clients to take a step back and look at the category that they're playing in. Because when you look at the category data, you can really get some untapped insights that you never knew about. And you can also look for white space that you may not have known existed. So at MotiveQuest, like I said, we custom harvest all of our data. We came up with a proprietary software 10 years ago that allows us to custom harvest data from blogs, forums, message boards. We hook to APIs like Facebook and Twitter and YouTube like everybody else. But that blog, forum, and message board data is a critical piece of data, especially when you're trying to understand categories. Now, when it comes to organizing the data, we organize it by channel in which it came from, but also we know that blog, forum, and message board data is a really great source of data. It's the richest data for understanding consumer behavior. So and you can take this and you will have other forms of data that you're working with. You may have email data that is your rich data. So just think in context of whatever your rich data is, thinking of a way that you can organize it in a little more structured of a way. So we take that data and we organize it by what we call passion sets. So this means where people are talking online about a certain thing is organized. So if I have diabetes and I'm talking about diabetes in a Ford F-150 forum, my conversation in our world gets bucketed into the automotive data set. Because what we find is if you only focus on health forums where you think the diabetes conversation is happening, you're actually missing a lot of other conversations across the internet that people are having related to the topic of diabetes, because people don't go and join new communities just because they're interested in something new or they have a new condition or whatever it might be. They chat in the communities that they're already talking in. So make sure that whatever your quality data is that you're working with, that you find a way to structure it and organize it so it's easier to understand. And we also have noticed that you need to look, refers back to the breadth of the data, you need to look beyond your brand and your competitors, because consumers don't talk about brands in the online world or the offline world as much as we as marketers would want. For example, in food CPG, we find about only 5% of the conversations are branded, 95% is unbranded. So the category is critical. And you have to know that the source of the category is blogs, forums, and message boards. So whatever your quality data source is, know what the standards are for it. You have to really go to automotive to get a good 50-50 split. So what this looks like if we're working with BMW, we'd say take a step back, look at the luxury car category and your brand and your competitors. So our data would look something like this after we were done organizing it. You'd have your social utilities, your YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, but then you'd have your blog, forum, and message board data broken out by passion set of where people are talking about luxury cars and BMW and its competitors. I'm going to hand it over to Kirsten, who's going to talk about data quality and share a few frameworks that we have at MotiveQuest on how we apply this smart data to better understanding it.
Okay, I'm going to take a very quick spin through some lessons learned by our clients in the last 10 years and give you a sense as to how they've determined it makes most sense to use social big data in the process of market research and consumer insight generation. First thing to bear in mind is that, as Zach said, bigger isn't always better in the context of social media data. It's very easy to get loads and loads of tweets very cheaply, very quickly. Unfortunately, what our clients have found over the past few years is that the Twitter data out there, while it's big and while it's quick and while it's relatively easy to get your hands on, is not necessarily the best data as far as rich consumer insights. Unfortunately, in the world of social media, by far the best consumer insights come from the data that is absolutely the hardest to get your hands on online, and that is forum and message board communities, where people are anonymous and they're unfettered by character restrictions, and they talk about things that are very, very personal, near and dear to their hearts, and they have conversations that are more candid than people would typically have face-to-face. Unfortunately, it's very hard to get your hands on this data. There's no single API that links into forum and message board data and gives you a really clean, clear view of the 500 million conversations that people are having in these venues every year. So our tech team is sort of represented by the robots over there. This isn't a process of crawling the web and making things very easy through automation. This is a very human, manual process to get great data. And it's not as big of data as Twitter is, but it can be far more valuable. So bear in mind that while all social data may have its place, bigger is not necessarily better for the purposes of market research or consumer insights. The other thing to bear in mind is that faster is not necessarily always better. You can get lots of social data very, very quickly. Unfortunately, unless you take the time to clean it up and dedupe it, you will be dealing with the wild west of unstructured data. You will see lots and lots of spam. You will see lots and lots of dupes, so much so that your results and your conclusions can really be thrown off track to a high degree. Now, I wanted to talk about two examples of how you might use this data once you've got your hands on it and once you're satisfied that you're sitting on good piles of social media data, maybe not the biggest piles of data out there, but rich ones. It's very important to work with frameworks rather than just lists of metrics that you might want to measure from this data. Probably the most popular framework that our clients turn to is the concept of advocacy, or measuring the number of people who are recommending a brand, a product, or a certain behavior. So this is a little bit like the Net Promoter Score, except that rather than asking people, would you recommend, you're actually watching them in the wild and capturing the number of times they recommend a product, a brand, or a behavior. Now, this is an interesting metric because it's not going to give you the biggest number at the end of the day. The advocacy framework actually captures the number of people making a recommendation, not the number of recommendations being made. So it equalizes the people who are really into a category and shout it from the hilltops versus those who are maybe casually involved and offer a recommendation once in a while. In essence, you're really measuring your grassroots sales force that's not on your payroll. And as I said, you might get very, very small numbers of advocates, but they will be an interesting predictor of changes in sales, changes in market share going forward. So bigger is not necessarily better in terms of data, but also the metrics that you use to measure that data. Interestingly, if you're kind of curious about how advocacy might be used, in the summer of 2011, you may remember the troubles that Netflix had when they announced price hikes and a spin-off of the DVD business. Their sentiment dropped like a rock in the summer of 2012. And every time a new unpopular announcement or price hike came out, sentiment plummeted. At the same time, advocacy or the rate of recommendation actually increased. So what you're actually looking at is not the off-the-cuff emotional response. You're looking at the more analytical response of a consumer who says, yeah, I'm ticked, but I'm going to think about this. What's a better option for me than Netflix? Nothing at this point. Netflix is the best option. I'm going to recommend that my friends, my colleagues, my peers stick with this brand or this service. The nice thing about advocacy is that you can think of it as the pinnacle of all of the behavior that happens online and give some context to the other social media metrics that you might measure. Advocacy is a really high bar to hit, and it gives some context to the engagement that people have with your brand. That is the extent to which they talk about it without necessarily recommending it, or the extent to which they participate with your brand, say in a Twitter feed or on your own Facebook page. Now, the next thing that we'll talk about very, very quickly is motivations. So this is another metric and framework, I should say, that's an interesting one to look at in the context of social media. It's not a big number either. It's not a really sexy number. It's this sense that people feel good or bad about brands. They also feel like certain brands, certain products, certain categories meet very fundamental needs that they may have in their lives. The desire to feel creative, the desire to have a little fun, the desire to feel like a rebel and transform themselves a bit. And what we found is that in a lot of categories of conversation, people are relatively tribe-like in their behavior and their discussions. They gravitate towards certain brands in one category because those brands seem to meet a deeper need than features and functions and product itself. So measuring these motivations by understanding the words and the linguistics that characterize the conversation is a really great, interesting way to use social media for deep market insights and consumer insights. But again, it doesn't give you a huge number, a big sexy metric at the end of the day, and it need not be based on millions and millions and millions of conversations. You can analyze 10,000 really great, rich conversations and come to some very interesting conclusions that can guide future research. With that, I'll turn things over to Zach again.
So I have 30 seconds to give you 4 secrets and hopefully some things that you can take home with you. So the first one is, and this doesn't just apply to big social data, this can apply to the big data that you have. First one is start with the business challenges and get the right data. We find that so many clients say, all right, we just got to understand this email data, or we got to understand this panel data. Really think about your challenge and try to back into the right data. And I can't express how important it is to start with the business challenge. We sometimes have clients come to us and they say, all right, we put this big campaign in place, now help us try to figure out how to measure it. Where the measurement piece should have came first, and then the campaign developed after that. The second one is sweat the coding. So many people skimp out on coding. It is so critical to make sure that you have quality coding, that it's accurate, and the time is taken to really build this out. We find that some vendors will sell coding. So they'll sell, okay, you get 100 keywords and for X amount of dollars, but you really you can't charge that way because the coding can't be limited. It really has to be in-depth and detailed to get the right frameworks. And build those frameworks. It's not about one framework. It's not about your old frameworks. This is the new world. This is the new big data world. Develop frameworks that are right for your company and that are right for your business challenges so that you can better understand your consumers and you can make your metrics and the overall success of the company better through these frameworks. And really tell data-driven stories. Big data is big, and you have to boil it down. No one wants 100, 200-page decks anymore. They want 20-slide decks, a 2-page white paper that gives them what they need to know, a data-driven story with implications and recommendations to do their job better. So hopefully we made you a little bit smarter and a little bit stronger in the big data world.
All right. We have time for a question or two. Anything?
Speechless.
Speechless. So you developed your algorithms proprietarily, you said?
Yeah, about 10 years ago, because
About-
our claim to fame is we were around before Facebook. So we didn't have any APIs to rely on back then to hook to get data. So we had to come up with a proprietary way of developing this machine that allows us to harvest this data from other sources like blogs and forums.
And one question I had was, you mentioned the diabetes person in the automotive chat forum,
Yeah.
and you classified them as automotive. But I'm sure that there's ways to classify them also by diabetes conversations and what percent are automotive versus...
Exactly.
sport,
So
yeah.
we'll organize the data across those different passion sets and show our clients where the conversations are being driven from. And then you can even dig into those passion sets and say how many are coming from blogs versus forums versus message boards. But even organization of data, it's surprising to us, and because it's an early thing that we do, like very early on before we even start the analysis, just organizing your data can lead to white space opportunities just like that. It's kind of crazy because you're 10% into the project and you've already found the idea.
Well, it's not as crazy as you think. I think, do we have a microphone? Sorry, they want to record every conversation because big data will get you at some point.
Just one quick question. You mentioned a couple times blogs and message boards being the best. Is that you might have said this already, but is that regardless of the category, or is that sort of a good general rule of thumb?
It does vary per category. I mean, some brands, I should say it's per brand more so, because some brands really know how to leverage social well. So they get a lot of conversation engagement going on Facebook and Twitter. But for the most part, when you're looking at the category data and consumer behavior, that's where the blog form and message board data really comes into play, because you're not limited by the 140 characters on Twitter. You know, Facebook is, you're identifiable. So whatever you share, your friends or people are going to see publicly, whereas in blogs, forums, and message boards, you're anonymous. So people say whatever they want or whatever they feel, and they can be more thoughtful about it.
And I should add as well, it also depends on your purpose. So in some cases, Twitter actually might be the best source of figuring out what's going on from a PR brand health perspective. Maybe you've got a crisis involving your product. Yeah, absolutely you want to go to Twitter because that is where people will react in the moment to the headlines, to the photos, to whatever it is that's setting everybody off at the time. The forums and the message boards tend to be where people go a little bit after the fact to have a deeper conversation about how they're dealing with whatever is going on in the market. Are they abandoning the product? Do they have alternate uses for the product? Do they have unmet needs in your category and they're compensating to some extent for what the market isn't offering? So there's not necessarily a right and a wrong. The only problem that we really see is that Twitter gets all the press because it's huge and it's everywhere and people are so prolific on Twitter, they just don't necessarily share the same level of insight on Twitter as they do in other places that tend to get ignored.
We like to think of it as the echo effect. Things start on Facebook and Twitter, and then they echo out into the larger digital ecosystem, and you can kind of measure, in a way, your earned media if you can look at that whole ecosystem.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Yep.